The unwelcome descent. The stars were a distant memory as Commander Julian Hayes stared out of the Excalibur's viewport. The vastness of space had always been a comfort, a constant that kept him grounded. But today, it felt different. The ship's violent lurch snapped him from his thoughts, and a harsh alarm filled the cabin, setting his pulse racing. Warning. Systems failure. Propulsion offline. Impact imminent. The voice of Aure, the ship's AI, cut through the panic in Julian's chest. The sound of the ship's hull groaning under the strain of the uncontrolled descents sent a chill down his spine. He quickly began adjusting the controls, his hands moving with practiced efficiency, but the ship's response was sluggish and erratic. The Excalibur was falling. There was no doubt about it. Can we make it? Julian gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead as he tried to stabilize the vessel. The AI's response was cold and calculated. Survival probability, 13%. Attempting course correction, 13%. Julian's voice was a mixture of disbelief and frustration. Already, make it 50%. The AI paused for a moment, then replied, recalculating trajectory. Adjustment in progress. The ship bucked and jolted as it broke through the planet's atmosphere, the exterior heating up with the intense friction of re-entry. Julian gripped the controls tighter, his knuckles white, as streaks of fiery orange lit up the viewport. The turbulent winds outside seemed to tear at the ship, pulling it this way and that. Every second felt like an eternity. Outside, the planet below was a swirl of dark greens and blues, a jungle-covered world, untouched by human hands. The landscape was breathtaking, but Julian barely had time to admire it. The Excalibur was in freefall, and survival was his only concern. The warning sirens blared louder as the ship's hull screamed under pressure. Sparks flew from the dashboard, and the lights flickered before plunging the cabin into an eerie half-darkness. Julian's breath quickened as he fought against the pull of gravity, trying to guide the ship to a less deadly landing. But nothing was working. "Hold on," he shouted, though he knew it was pointless. There was no way to stop the inevitable crash. The Excalibur hit the surface with a bone-rattling crash, the shockwave throwing Julian forward into the restraints of his seat. Pain flared through his chest, but he barely felt it. His mind focused on survival. Smoke filled the cabin, and the scent of burned circuits hung in the air. When the ship finally came to a halt, the silence that followed was deafening. Julian could hear his own ragged breathing as he unclipped his harness. His head spun as he stood, but there was no time to waste. He had to assess the situation. He quickly checked the status of the ship's systems, but the damage was catastrophic. There was no chance of getting the Excalibur back into the air without serious repairs. Status report, Julian called, his voice hoarse. Structural integrity, 22%. Emergency power, 14%. Atmospheric composition outside, breathable. However, the environment contains unknown particulates. Julian cursed under his breath. He had no choice but to leave the ship. "Looks like we're going for a walk," he muttered. He grabbed his gear, survival suit, multi-tool, and plasma pistol, and strapped them on. The hatch opened with a hiss, and Julian stepped out into the unknown. The world that greeted him was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Towering trees stretched high into the sky, their trunks glowing faintly with a bioluminescent light. The air was thick with moisture, and the scent of something sweet but unfamiliar filled his nostrils. Shadows shifted around him, adding to the eerie stillness of the forest. The ground beneath his boots was soft and spongy, covered with strange, luminescent plants that pulsed with light as he walked. Every step seemed to echo through the vast, silent jungle. Julian took a deep breath and tapped his wrist console. Map the area. I need to know what I'm working with. A moment later, the console blinked to life, a map of the surrounding jungle appearing on the screen. It was an alien world, unexplored and full of unknowns, but it was also his only hope of survival. As Julian moved deeper into the jungle, the silence around him became oppressive. The occasional rustle of leaves or distant call of an unseen creature was the only sound that broke the quiet. Despite the beauty of the environment, something about it made Julian uneasy, a feeling that prickled at the back of his neck. His instincts told him he wasn't alone. A flicker of movement caught his eye, and Julian's hand instinctively went to his plasma pistol. He scanned the shadows, but saw nothing. He stopped, his eyes narrowing as he listened intently, his senses on high alert. "I know you're there," Julian called out, his voice steady despite the tension in his chest. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a woman or something like one. Her skin shimmered with an ethereal glow, a faint shade of violet that seemed to change with every step. Her eyes, silver and piercing, locked onto his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "You've intruded on my world, human," she said, her voice soft, but carrying an unmistakable warning. "And that comes with consequences." Julian's grip on his weapon tightened, but he didn't draw it. Instead, he sized her up, trying to read her intentions. He couldn't afford to make a mistake here. "Well, that's a nice greeting," Julian said, forcing a smirk. "I'm just here to fix my ship and leave. Didn't exactly plan on crashing into your backyard." Her lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "You should have thought of that before you landed here." The tension between them was palpable, the jungle around them seeming to hold its breath. Julian's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. This wasn't just some random alien world. It was something more, and the woman in front of him was no mere native. He could feel it in his bones. He didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was certain. This was just the beginning. The Guardian's warning. The air between Julian and the strange woman seemed to crackle with an almost tangible energy. His hand never strayed far from his weapon, but he kept his posture neutral, his instincts screaming for caution. She was no ordinary alien. The way she stood, poised and unbothered by the threatening environment around them, made it clear that she wasn't afraid of him, or anything else. Julian's mind raced, trying to piece together what he had just encountered. "I'm guessing you're not just some local who likes to hang out in the jungle," he said, keeping his tone casual as he sized her up. "What are you exactly?" The woman's silver eyes narrowed as she studied him, her expression unreadable. "I am Lyra," she said, her voice melodic yet laced with a quiet authority. "Guardian of this world and protector of its secrets. And you, human, have violated its sanctity." Julian couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at the title. Guardian? Secrets? "Look, I didn't sign up for any of this. My ship went down, and I just need to get it fixed so I can leave. That's it." Lyra's gaze hardened. "You believe you can simply leave after disturbing the balance of this place, after trespassing on the sacred grounds of this planet." Julian felt a prickling sensation at the back of his neck. He had been on many strange planets before, but something about this one felt different. The air seemed thick with something ancient, something powerful. Lyra herself radiated a presence that made the trees around them appear still, almost as if they too were waiting for her next move. "I'm not here to ruin your planet's balance," Julian replied, his voice firm but with a touch of frustration. "I didn't mean to crash here. The ship's systems failed. We're stuck, and all I want is to fix it and go home." Lyra tilted her head, studying him as though she were weighing his every word. Her eyes gleamed with a strange light, as if she could see deeper into his soul. "You may believe you're innocent, human, but nothing here happens by accident. Not with your kind." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unnerving. Julian shifted his stance, unsure of what she meant, but certain that her presence was anything but reassuring. The jungle around them, once quiet, now seemed to hum with a low, ominous vibration, as if the very planet itself was responding to Lyra's words. "You think you're the first to stumble upon this world," Lyra continued, her voice steady, but filled with an undeniable edge. Every intruder who has set foot here has had their fate sealed by the power of this land. This world is not kind to those who disrupt its peace. Julian tried to mask his unease, but a shiver ran down his spine. He had dealt with hostile environments before, but this felt different. The air itself seemed alive, and there was a strange, almost sentient energy in the ground beneath his feet. The forest, with its glowing trees and shifting shadows, felt like it was watching him, judging him. "I'm not interested in trouble," Julian said, keeping his voice calm but edged with warning. "I just need to repair my ship. I'll leave, and that'll be the end of it." Lyra's expression softened, but only slightly. "You misunderstand, human. This place doesn't care for your intentions. It cares for your actions." She stepped closer, her movements graceful yet deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. "The balance you've disturbed cannot be undone so easily." Julian felt his grip tighten on his pistol, though he knew it was a futile gesture. He had no idea what kind of power Lyra held, but it was clear that she wasn't someone to be trifled with. "I'm guessing that's not a threat," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "So, what? I'm stuck here forever." Lyra's eyes gleamed with a mix of sadness and amusement, but there was no warmth in her gaze. "Nothing lasts forever, not even you, human." The words hit him harder than he expected, and Julian felt a chill creep up his spine. This wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. "Then I'll make it my mission to leave," Julian said, his voice hardening with determination. "No matter what it takes." Lyra's lips curled into a faint smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll find that not everything is under your control, human. There are forces at work here far beyond your understanding. This world is not yours to command." Before Julian could respond, a low rumble echoed through the ground beneath them. It was subtle at first, like a distant thunderclap, but it grew louder, more intense. The trees around them seemed to tremble, and the air thickened with the sound of a deep, rumbling energy. Lyra's gaze flickered toward the horizon, her expression unreadable. "The planet has noticed you, human," she said, her voice quiet but filled with a foreboding tone. "And it will not be so forgiving. You've made your presence known, and now you will face the consequences." Julian's mind raced, trying to grasp what she meant. But before he could ask, the ground shook once more violently this time. The trees around them began to bend, their branches creaking and groaning under an unseen force. It was as if the planet itself was responding to Lyra's words, reacting to something ancient and powerful awakening beneath their feet. Lyra's gaze remained steady, her presence unwavering despite the growing chaos around them. "I warned you," she said softly. "This world has no tolerance for intruders, and now it will show you why." Julian didn't know whether to run or fight, but deep down, he knew that escaping this place wouldn't be as simple as fixing his ship and walking away. This planet, this world, had its own agenda, and it seemed determined to see it through. And as much as Julian hated to admit it, he might just be caught in its plans. The binding of fates. The ground beneath Julian's boots trembled again, more violently this time, as if the planet itself was awakening, reacting to something far older than either of them. The trees around them creaked ominously, their bioluminescent trunks bending as the air pulsed with an almost sentient energy. Julian's instincts screamed at him to move, to find shelter, but the eerie stillness of Lyra's presence kept him rooted in place. "Is this part of the balance you keep talking about?" Julian asked, his voice barely above a whisper, though the words were edged with defiance. The rumbling intensified, as if the world itself was listening, and he wasn't sure if he was speaking to Lyra or the planet. Lyra didn't answer at first. Her expression remained impassive, though her eyes flickered with a kind of knowing that unsettled him. "You will soon understand," she replied, her voice tinged with something Julian couldn't quite place. Resignation, perhaps, or a quiet forewarning. Without warning, Lyra raised her hand, and the jungle around them seemed to respond. The ground beneath Julian's feet cracked, and a deep, almost primal hum filled the air. The trees groaned as if bowing to her command, their branches stretching and intertwining in strange, spiraling patterns. Julian stepped back, instinctively reaching for his weapon, though he wasn't sure what he was facing. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice rising with a mix of confusion and anger. "Some kind of trap." "No," Lyra replied, her voice calm and almost soothing. "This is not a trap, human. This is the way of things here. The planet is bound to me, as I am bound to it. Our fates are woven together. And now, yours is too." Julian's heart raced as the meaning of her words began to sink in. He had heard of planets with strange, almost mystical properties, worlds where the land itself had a life force, a consciousness. But this felt different. This felt as though he wasn't simply an intruder on some alien world. He was part of something much larger, something ancient, and far beyond his understanding. He glanced around, his mind scrambling for answers. The glowing plants around them pulsed in time with the hum, their light intensifying. He could feel the air thickening, pressing in on him from all sides. "What does this mean for me?" Julian asked, his voice steady despite the growing unease crawling under his skin. Lyra's silver eyes met his, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. "It means," she began, her words deliberate and heavy with weight, "that the planet has accepted your presence. Whether you wish it or not, your fate is now entwined with this world's." A wave of panic surged through Julian. He had been to dozens of alien planets, and none of them had reacted to him like this. Most were indifferent, some were hostile, but none had felt alive, as if the planet itself was watching, judging him. This world, with its strange energy and the looming presence of Lyra, felt like a force unto itself, one that didn't tolerate trespassers. "You're saying that I have no choice in the matter, that I'm stuck here." Julian's voice was sharp now, the fear in his gut manifesting in frustration. Lyra's lips parted in a smile that seemed almost pitying. "Not stuck, human. You are chosen." Julian frowned, trying to make sense of her cryptic words. Chosen for what? Her expression darkened, and the hum of the forest around them seemed to grow louder, more insistent. "You have come to this place because you are needed. The balance of this world is fragile, and there are forces at play that you cannot understand. Forces that have been awakened by your arrival." The ground trembled once more, this time with more intensity, and the trees around them swayed as if caught in a powerful gust of wind. But the sky above them was eerily still, as if the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. Julian clenched his fists, his mind racing. "I didn't come here to be part of some grand scheme. I just need to fix my ship and get out of here." Lyra's eyes flashed with a strange gleam, her posture suddenly more imposing. "You think you can just leave? This world doesn't work like that. You can't simply walk away when you've already set things in motion." Julian took a step back, unease flooding his chest. "Set things in motion. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to crash here." Lyra's gaze softened, but there was an unmistakable sharpness to her tone. "It doesn't matter if you asked for it or not. The universe has a way of pulling you into things, whether you're ready or not. You've disturbed something ancient, human, and now you must face the consequences." Julian felt a strange heat rising in the air around them, and the earth beneath his feet seemed to pulse with a slow, deliberate rhythm, like a heartbeat. The trees around them began to shimmer, their leaves rippling like waves on an unseen ocean. He could feel the power of this place, its ancient, deep energy. And for the first time, he began to wonder if leaving was even possible. "I don't know what's happening here," Julian muttered, his eyes scanning the shifting landscape. "But I can't stay. I won't stay." Lyra's smile widened, though there was no warmth in it. "You won't have to," she said softly. "But you may wish you could." Before Julian could respond, the jungle around them seemed to explode in motion. The ground beneath their feet cracked open with a deep, resonant sound, and from the fissures, strange glowing tendrils shot up, curling into the air like massive, serpentine creatures. The forest seemed to come alive, responding to Lyra's presence, and to the disturbance caused by Julian's arrival. The tendrils reached out, their glowing tips brushing the air with a low hum, and Julian instinctively stepped back. "What is that? What are you doing?" he shouted, fear rising in his chest as the jungle seemed to close in on him. Lyra stood perfectly still, watching as the tendrils grew higher, their eerie light casting strange shadows on the ground. "The planet has chosen to test you, human, to see if you are worthy of its secrets." The tendrils began to close in on him, their glowing light intensifying, and Julian felt a sharp chill run down his spine. His heart pounded in his chest, but there was nowhere to run. The planet was not just alive, it was watching him. And it wasn't about to let him leave without a reckoning. The trial of the unseen. The world seemed to hold its breath as Julian stood there, trapped between Lyra's steady gaze and the growing tendrils that writhed from the earth around them. The air grew heavy, saturated with an energy that felt both ancient and unnervingly present. It was as though the jungle itself had become an extension of the mysterious force that Lyra commanded, a force that now seemed intent on testing him. "You're not really going to let these things touch me, are you?" Julian asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and rising fear. He instinctively took a step back, his eyes darting around for any potential escape. The tendrils, glowing a soft green and pulsing with some unknown rhythm, stretched toward him as though they were alive, sensing his every movement. Lyra didn't flinch, her eyes locked onto him with an intensity that sent an involuntary shiver up his spine. "This is not about what I choose, human. This is about what you are capable of." Julian swallowed hard, his mind scrambling for a way out of this. The tendrils were closing in, their strange light reflecting off the leaves and casting long, eerie shadows across the jungle floor. He was no stranger to danger, but something about this alien, primal force, felt beyond his experience. It was unlike any threat he had ever faced. The tendrils drew nearer, their glowing ends now brushing the edges of his boots, their proximity setting his heart racing. The air felt charged, thick with some kind of invisible pressure. His mind screamed at him to run, to flee from the encroaching tendrils, but every instinct told him that flight would only worsen whatever was coming next. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing," Julian muttered, trying to maintain a steady, confident exterior. "But if you think I'm going to sit here and let your jungle strangle me, you're wrong." Lyra's lips twitched into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. But there was no humor in it. "You misunderstand, human. The trial is not for me. It is for you." With a swift, almost imperceptible motion, Lyra raised her hand again, and the tendrils stopped, their pulsating glow dimming just slightly. The jungle around them shifted, its silent watch over them unbroken, as though waiting for Julian to make his move. "The trial is a test of worth," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "The planet, this world, demands respect. The forces you now face are part of that demand. They are here to see if you can prove yourself worthy of what you seek." Julian's mind raced. Worthy of what? He had never asked for this. All he had wanted was to repair his ship and leave this place. But somehow, fate, or this strange planet, had other plans. "What do you want from me?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. The frustration, fear, and growing confusion in his chest threatened to spill over. Lyra's gaze softened for a brief moment, but the pity was fleeting. "It is not what I want, Julian Hayes. It is what this world desires from you. What you're willing to give in order to walk away alive. Every soul who has dared to tread upon this sacred ground has faced the trial, and every one of them has failed." The word hung in the air, weighted with ancient finality. Julian's stomach churned. He wasn't about to become another casualty, another failure. He had survived too much in his life to let some alien jungle claim him without a fight. "You said I'm chosen," Julian said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at him. "Chosen for what?" Lyra's eyes gleamed with a dark understanding, and for the first time, Julian saw the weight of the centuries in her gaze. "Chosen for the challenge, for the power that this world holds. To leave with the knowledge, the strength, if you can prove yourself worthy." Julian clenched his fists. He hadn't come here to become some mythical hero. He hadn't come here to become part of some grand design. He had come here for survival. But in that moment, he realized that survival was no longer a simple matter of fixing his ship and walking away. This planet, and Lyra herself, had already woven him into its story. "Prove myself worthy," Julian muttered, more to himself than to her. He turned toward the pulsating tendrils, which had now retracted slightly, their glow dimming just enough to give him room to think. There was a long pause before he turned back to Lyra, his jaw set in determination. "If it's a test, then let's get it over with." A flicker of surprise passed through Lyra's eyes, but she said nothing. Instead, she stepped aside, gesturing toward the tendrils. "Then prove it, human." Without waiting for further command, Julian took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead. He took one step forward, his boots crunching against the alien foliage beneath him. The tendrils reacted instantly, their glowing tips lashing toward him with lightning speed. In an instinctive move, Julian sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the tendrils as they whipped past, their energy crackling in the air. His heart raced, his pulse thundering in his ears. He had never faced anything like this before. An opponent not made of flesh, but of raw energy and ancient will. As he moved, Julian quickly realized that this wasn't just a physical challenge. The tendrils were testing something deeper: his resolve, his adaptability, his ability to survive against the forces of the universe itself. The jungle wasn't just watching, it was measuring him. Every move he made, every decision, was being weighed. The tendrils came at him again, faster this time, their glowing tips nearly touching his skin as they passed. Julian's breath came in quick, sharp gasps, but his mind was focused. He couldn't afford to let his fear control him now. He had to adapt. He had to fight. With a sudden burst of movement, Julian leaped to the side, avoiding the tendrils once again. He was beginning to understand the rhythm of their movement, how they reacted to his every shift. It was like a dance, a deadly one. If he could master it, he could survive. He didn't know how long the trial would last, or what the consequences would be if he failed, but there was no turning back now. The jungle had chosen him, and now he had no choice but to fight his way through. And as the tendrils surged toward him again, Julian was ready. The depths of the trial. The jungle hummed around Julian, the air thick with the scent of alien flora and the heavy weight of the trial that was now unfolding before him. The tendrils, their glowing tips still thrumming with an ethereal pulse, lunged once more, but this time, Julian was ready. His instincts, honed by years of space exploration and survival, guided him as he weaved and dodged, narrowly avoiding the deadly tendrils that slithered through the air like living, pulsating serpents. Every movement he made was precise, calculated. His boots pounded against the soft, spongy ground as he sidestepped and pivoted, his body a blur of motion. It wasn't just his physical strength he relied on. It was his mind, his ability to adapt to an ever-changing situation, to outthink whatever challenge the planet, or Lyra, could throw at him. For a moment, Julian found himself at the center of a whirlwind of light and movement. The tendrils surrounded him, but he no longer felt the panic from earlier. There was no room for fear now, just the need to survive. His mind was a razor-sharp blade, slicing through the chaos with calculated precision. But the trial wasn't just about dodging the tendrils. Julian could feel it in his bones. The planet was testing him on a deeper level. It wasn't about the physicality of the fight. It was about his will to endure, to prove that he could survive not just the jungle's challenges, but the very force of the world itself. The tendrils lashed out again, faster this time, their glowing tips leaving trails of radiant light in the air. Julian ducked and spun, narrowly avoiding the sharp edge of one that came dangerously close to his neck. He could feel the heat from its energy, the raw power that radiated from the earth itself, and he knew that if he made one wrong move, it could be the end. His muscles screamed with exhaustion, but he refused to stop. There was something deeper at stake here. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for something more, something intangible. This world had chosen him, and the stakes were higher than he could have ever anticipated. The jungle, with its eerie glow and its shifting, pulsating energy, seemed to react to his every movement, as though it was feeding off his determination. The tendrils, now circling him like a deadly dance, were becoming more erratic, more unpredictable. The rhythm of their movements shifted as if they were adapting to him, testing his ability to adjust. "Is this it?" Julian muttered between heavy breaths, sweat pouring down his face. "Is this what you wanted? To see if I can endure?" Lyra, standing a few meters away, watched him intently. Her silver eyes flickered with something like approval, but there was no warmth in her expression. She said nothing, simply observing as the trial continued. For a moment, Julian's mind began to wander. He thought of his crew, his people back on the Excalibur, and the promise he had made to them to get them out of this. He couldn't let them down, not after everything they had been through. They had survived the cold vastness of space, faced down countless dangers together, and now, it seemed, they were depending on him to survive this trial. His hand instinctively tightened around the handle of his plasma pistol, but he knew he wouldn't be able to use it here, not against the force of the planet itself. This was a test of his mind, not his weaponry. Another tendril shot toward him with lightning speed. He dodged it just in time, but he was beginning to feel the weight of the trial press down on him. His body was weary, his breath ragged, and his every muscle screamed for relief. But there was no escape. Not now, not when he had come so far. Lyra's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "You are learning, human, but survival is not enough. This trial will show you whether you are worthy of the power that this world offers." Julian paused for a brief moment, his eyes narrowing as he glanced toward her. "Power," he repeated, his mind racing. "What power?" Lyra's lips curled into a thin smile, but it was distant and cold. "The power of this world, the knowledge hidden within it, the strength to control it. If you survive this trial, you will be shown what this place can offer. But that comes at a cost." Julian's heart raced. He had heard enough to know that nothing on this planet came without consequences. "And if I fail?" Lyra's expression darkened, the faint glow of her eyes intensifying. "Then you will not leave. This world will claim you as it has claimed others, and your story will become part of its ancient history." The words hung in the air like a warning, but Julian refused to let fear take hold of him. He wasn't about to give up, not when he had come this far. The tendrils moved in again, faster, more synchronized. Julian barely had time to react as one shot toward him from behind. He spun, narrowly dodging it as it whipped past him. The pulse of energy from the tendril scorched the air, leaving a faint afterimage in its wake. Adrenaline surged through his veins as he ducked low, feeling the energy of the tendrils brush against his body with each near miss. His movements were a blur, instinct guiding him as he danced through the chaos, evading each strike with a mix of speed and calculated precision. He could feel the weight of every moment, every second that passed. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. And then, something changed. In the midst of the chaos, Julian felt a shift in the air. The tendrils, which had been relentless in their pursuit, suddenly paused, hovering in place. The jungle around him stilled, as if waiting for something, for him to make his next move. This wasn't just a physical trial anymore. It was a test of his spirit, his heart. The jungle, the world, was asking him, "What are you willing to sacrifice? What will you do to prove that you deserve to walk away? Julian's chest heaved as he took a moment to breathe. His body ached, his mind raced, but he knew the answer. He had already come too far to back down. This was his moment to show the planet and himself that he wasn't just a survivor. He was a fighter. He stepped forward, his gaze unwavering, ready to face whatever came next. The heart of the world. The world seemed to draw in a collective breath as Julian stood poised, his body trembling with exhaustion, his mind razor-sharp despite the overwhelming pressure that weighed down on him. The tendrils, which had been relentless in their pursuit, now hovered at the edges of his vision, waiting, as if contemplating their next move. The eerie stillness in the air pressed against him, the jungle holding its breath, watching him as though this was the final moment of his trial. Lyra's silver eyes gleamed in the dim light, her expression unreadable. "You have done well, human," she said, her voice carrying a note of something approaching respect. But it was fleeting. Her words weren't a compliment. Not really. But the test is not over. Julian didn't flinch, though the words cut deeper than he expected. His breath came in ragged gasps, his muscles aching, his body on the edge of collapse. But he stood tall, unwilling to show weakness, unwilling to let this trial be the end of him. His mind was sharp, fueled by the need to survive and the unrelenting desire to prove that he was more than just an intruder on this alien world. Lyra's gaze flickered toward the pulsating tendrils that surrounded them. And for a moment, it seemed like the jungle itself responded. The tendrils twitched, their glowing energy intensifying as they slowly began to retract into the earth. Julian's instincts told him something was changing, something was about to change, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. He had learned to act, not to wait. "You faced the physical trial, human," Lyra continued, her voice soft, almost like a lullaby. "But there was no comfort in it. But now comes the true test. The heart of this world will judge you, and only those who understand the true nature of balance will survive." Julian's brow furrowed in confusion. The heart of the world. What the hell does that mean? He couldn't suppress the frustration that bubbled up. He had done everything the planet had asked of him, avoided every strike, adapted to every challenge. And yet, it seemed that this strange, living planet wasn't done with him yet. Lyra's lips curled slightly, the faintest trace of a smile. "You will see for yourself." Without another word, she turned and began to walk deeper into the jungle. Julian hesitated for a moment, his mind a whirlwind of questions, but he knew he had no choice but to follow. Something in the air told him that whatever came next would shape the outcome of this trial and his future. The jungle around them seemed to part as they walked, the glowing trees bending away as if making room for Lyra's passage. The deeper they went, the more the atmosphere seemed to shift. The air grew thick with energy, charged with a force that hummed beneath the surface. It felt like the jungle itself was alive, breathing in sync with their movements. Julian's senses were on high alert. He could hear the distant sounds of creatures calling out in the jungle, but there was something different about this place, something older. The further they ventured, the quieter the forest became. It was as though they were venturing into a place where the rules of the outside world no longer applied. After what felt like an eternity of walking, they reached a clearing, a vast, open space that seemed to pulse with an ethereal glow. At the center of the clearing stood a massive stone structure, ancient and weathered, covered in vines and glowing moss. The air around it shimmered with a strange energy, and Julian felt his skin prickle with anticipation. "What is this place?" Julian asked, his voice a mixture of awe and unease. Lyra stopped before the stone structure, her posture regal, like she was offering him a challenge, an invitation to face whatever lay beyond. "This is the heart of the world, the source of its power. It is where the balance of life and death, creation and destruction, is maintained." Julian took a cautious step forward, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the structure. The stone seemed to pulse with an energy he couldn't understand, an energy that both repelled and drew him in. It was as if the structure itself was alive, waiting for him to approach. He felt a weight settle in his chest, a deep and ancient presence that made the jungle feel like a distant memory. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. He didn't know if he was speaking to Lyra or the world itself. It didn't matter. He just wanted answers. Lyra's voice, soft but unwavering, filled the air. "You must choose." Julian's brow furrowed in confusion. "Choose what?" Her gaze flickered to the stone structure. "The heart of this world will offer you a choice. You can either take its power and claim dominion over this planet, its knowledge, its strength, or you can walk away, choosing to leave this world and return to your people, leaving the balance undisturbed." The words hung in the air, heavy with consequence. Julian's mind raced. The power of the planet, the strength to control it. It was an alluring offer, but it came with an unspoken cost. He knew it, deep in his gut. "Why would I take control of this world?" Julian asked, the skepticism in his voice unmistakable. "I didn't come here to rule anything. I came here to survive." Lyra's expression was unreadable. "Survival is often more complicated than you think. What you choose here will define your fate. It will determine whether you can leave with your life, or whether you will become part of the planet's history, like all who came before you." Julian stood there for a long moment, staring at the stone structure, his mind racing. The offer was tempting, too tempting, but he had seen what happened to those who sought power for its own sake. He had seen worlds destroyed by unchecked ambition, by the lust for control. He didn't want to become one of those stories, lost to the ancient powers of this world. But the alternative, to leave, to walk away without knowing what could have been, that seemed just as unbearable. In the end, Julian realized the choice wasn't about power, it was about responsibility. And no matter what he chose, it would change everything. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next.